Thank you. So I'm Robin Cook. I work for Elephants Alive, which is an NGO based in the Greater Kruger National Park. And I look at elephant impact on big trees and ways that we can mitigate that impact, as well as trying to understand how that impact affects other species. So what I'm going to be presenting tonight is one of our newish projects, which started about 4 or 5 years ago, called our Bees and Trees project. And here is where we're looking at using African honeybees to protect marula trees against elephant impact. And so what I'm going to take you through is a bit of what we've learned over the last 4 years whilst conducting this research. So elephant bee research began in the early 2000s in Kenya by Dr. Lucy King from Save the Elephants. And what they were first finding is that if you played the sounds of buzzing bees to elephants, you got a very distinct reaction where the elephants would stop what they were doing and they would lift their heads and their trunk comes up and there's a swish of the head and they move away. But what they also found was that these elephants were giving off a very unique rumble sound. And so the researchers recorded this rumble sound and would play it to other groups of elephants not exposed to that original honeybee buzzing sound, and they found very similar behaviors where the elephants would stop what they were doing and there's the head coming up in a swish and they move away. So there seemed to be some sort of negative association that the elephants had with these bees. And it sounds strange because we all think of elephants as these thick-skinned creatures. But the thing is, they've got 3 weak spots on their bodies where bee stings are going to be very painful, and that's the eyes, the ears, and the trunk. So any bee sting there, the elephant's going to feel it. So what Dr. King then did was to use bees for a solution to human-elephant conflict and thus looking at human-elephant coexistence. And that was by designing beehive fences. So you can see those in the pictures on the screen. They are beehives connected to one another by wires, and they go around a crop field. So as your elephant comes to crop raid, it touches those wires and it causes the hives to start to sway and the bees come out. Now in Africa, we have the African honeybee, which is a notoriously aggressive honeybee species and it attacks in large numbers when disturbed. And so it works really well here. What's also interesting is this project's been expanded into Asia, where they use both the European and the Asian honeybees to less of an effect as we get in Africa, but still it's encouraging to see how this project has grown. However, in South Africa, the situation is a bit different, and that's because we fence off our reserves. So our elephants are remaining inside our protected areas. So crop raiding isn't really a thing in this country. However, we then come to the issue of elephant impact on large tree species. And especially in our smaller reserves or reserves that have a lot of water, this can become quite a problem for managers. And so it evolves into this animosity that we get from managers or landowners towards elephants because of the impact they might have on particular tree species within their reserves. So one of the options that you can look at when you want to protect a tree species is actually directly protecting the tree itself. And this works when you can't manipulate elephant movements if you're in a smaller system or you've got too much water. So since 2004, Elephants Alive have been experimenting with various ways that you can protect trees, and we evaluate each method based on its level of effectiveness, its finances, and how long it's going to actually last in the field. So to just go into elephant impact itself, we look at 4 main types of impacts that the LEs are having on large trees, and that's bark stripping, where they're removing bark around the main stem of a tree, or branch breakage, and then moving to your heavier forms such as uprooting and main stem snapping. And so all of this can affect your tree survival in the long term. So therefore, we had the question, could we look at what's happening in Kenya where they protect crops from elephants? Could we use bees here in South Africa to protect trees from elephant impact? So we work in a reserve called Kruger Private Nature Reserve. It's based in the Greater Kruger National Park system, and we've got a study site there where we're looking at marula trees, which are a keystone species in this country, and LEs really love eating them. So it's a tree that if we can show that the bee method can protect a marula tree, it's therefore hopefully going to be quite effective with most other tree species. how do you actually go about putting beehives in trees? It all happens at nighttime when the bees are in their hives and they are least active and easiest to work with. However, then you've got to take into account you're working in a big 5 reserve in the middle of the night. So what we did was we chose a study site where we had to try and increase our sample size so we could actually do statistics with this project, but also keep it logistically viable. So we had 50 marula trees that we went in at nighttime and actually hung these beehives in the trees themselves. And that would allow us to, over time, see how the bees would protect those trees. And so you get a beehive tree which looks like this. That's your marula tree. On the one side, you've got your active hive, and it's hanging 2 meters above the ground, so it's eye height for an elephant when it's coming towards the tree. And on the other side, we've got a dummy hive. And the reason for that is with some of our larger trees, the elephants are smart enough to avoid the beehive, and they'll still impact the tree on the other side. So we wanted to try put a box over there. It's got no bees inside of it, but it looks like the beehive itself, and to see how that model would work at protecting these trees. But now we also wanted to compare the effectiveness of this method with another method that's commonly used, and that's called wire netting. Now, wire netting involves putting chicken mesh around the tree's main stem, and you're doing that purely to stop bark stripping. So when a tree gets bark stripped, it starts to lose its nutrient flow and it becomes vulnerable to insect infestation, to fire damage, etc. And it's a very cheap, easy to use method. So we wire netted another 50 trees in the study site to test the two methods against one another. There you can see what wire netting looks like. It blends in quite well in the field and is basically just preventing the elephants from removing bark from those trees. And so you sit with a study site that looks like this: 50 beehive trees, 50 wire netted trees, and then 50 control trees. And a control tree means it's got no protection on it. So we're just seeing what would happen if a tree wasn't protected in the first place. Then what we do is go into the field and we actually give these trees mathematical scores. So we're scoring their levels of bark stripping, branch breakage, uprooting, stem snapping, and they all get a score. And then each year we go into the field and reassess every single tree in that site, so you can actually start seeing how the scores increase. So if you've got a method that you think works really well, you would hope that your scores would generally not increase or increase really slowly. And if it's a method that's not working, you might see a big increase in your impact. And so what have we found after 4 years? In that study site, of our control trees, 82% have received some form of elephant impact, whether it be bark stripping, branch breakage, or a tree actually getting toppled, versus 54% of our wire netted trees and just 10% of our beehive trees. And then encouragingly, when you look into the top right corner, 22% of the control trees have died, 20% of our wire netted trees, and just 2% of the beehive trees. So we're really seeing over time that these ellies are just staying away from those trees that have these beehives in them. And we've been lucky enough to observe some of the interactions with them as well. So that top left photo you see there, this was a group of 5 bulls that were walking straight towards this marula tree, which had a very active beehive in it. And they stop about 5 meters away. And there was a lot of displacement behavior. So they got into a bit of a clump. They started throwing sand around. They weren't happy. And they did a complete loop around that tree and then moved on. So what we're seeing is it's not a large scale effect. You're not chasing elephants away from an area. They're still able to feed on the nearby vegetation, but they stay away from that particular tree. And then we can look at the results when we really break it down into the impact types. So you can look at bark stripping, for example, and you can see your control scores eventually go up as time progresses because the ellies have access to those trees. Wire netting does very well, and it's what we expect because it's stopping bark stripping, and the beehives, they just don't go to those trees. And then you can look at branch breakage, and once again, you see control and wire netted trees starting to increase, and the bees very slightly. So sometimes if a hive goes inactive, you get the elephants feeding a bit on it. But in general, we're even seeing that they stay away from an inactive hive once they've learned that it's a potential threat. And then we can look at our heavier impact types, controls and wire netting once again going up when you're looking at stem snapping. Bees at just levels, there's no impact over there. And the same for uprooting. You've got control and wire netting going up. Now you see there the bees have gone up slightly, and this was an interesting case because we had no bees in these hives. These bees absconded quite early on in the season, and then we had a musk bull come through, and when a bull's in must, he's got a lot of testosterone, his bravery levels shoot up, and this tree unfortunately got flattened by it. But it also then begs the question is, we're dealing with a very intelligent species here. And that's what you see in these photos. They start to learn when a hive doesn't have bees in it anymore. This big bull came to this tree. He opened up the hive. There were no bees there. And he actually takes out the frames. And you can see on his back there, all of the frames sitting there. So he was having a field time with our hive. So we saw these photos in the morning and thought, no, we can't have this happen because elephants are so smart that one could start training the others as to which ones aren't or are active. So what we did that night is we brought in another hive that we had at our camp, and that elephant has not come back to this tree, and the tree's still standing very proudly and tall. So we need to always remember we're dealing with very smart creatures here, and we need to keep changing our designs and where we do and don't have active hives at times to try and stay one level up with the elephants. It's also important, though, to remember that we're not proposing putting beehives in every single tree in the Kruger National Park. So we're using a study site of a fairly large number of trees for the statistics, but it all comes down to a single tree or one or two or three trees that a landowner wants to protect on their property, whether it be a nice marula tree or a baobab or a tree they just really don't want the ellies to come near. We're trying to show that here's a method that you could use on a small scale to protect your particular trees from them. And so some of these results have been published a couple of years ago in Biological Conservation, and so you're welcome to read up on it there. And as we say, each year we carry on doing these assessments and we're learning more and more as we go by as to the longevity of this project. But then excitingly, we've also looked at project expansion and how can we show that this is a sustainable project, because it is fairly expensive to set up, but what can you get out of it in the long run? And one of the major things has been honey production. So looking at natural honey that's made from the Kruger Park system itself. So we've done about 9 harvests in the last 2 years, getting 90 liters of honey. And we've sold 470 jars to both local and international customers within the greater Kruger National Park system. And what's so fascinating about this honey is every single month the taste is changing because it always depends on what flowers are flowering in the Kruger Park itself. So you can taste it in October and you get a lot of your knobthorn taste over there. And then as soon as you're tasting the December honey, it's completely different because you've got other species which are flowering. So it's been fascinating for us to learn more about how this works and to also show that there is income within this project if you take it on. Then we've teamed up with Professor Mark Wright from the University of Hawaii and Transfrontier Africa and ISCA Technologies in the USA. And we've been looking at pheromones. So how can we use bee biology to deter elephants, in particular the actual attack pheromones that bees give off? Now, to just go into some of the biology behind that, you get your guard bees on the outside of your beehive, and they're busy checking who's coming in and out. But when there's a disturbance, they let off a very unique pheromone smell, which almost smells like nail polish remover. And any of you who've harvested from a hive before would know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a very strong smell they're giving off. So scientists have now looked at the compounds within this pheromone, and they've designed a synthetic paste which reflects the bee pheromones. So you can take this paste, put it near a hive, and the hive goes crazy because you're giving them a full dose of attack. But what's happening is all these bees are now getting to the point where their aggression level is so high that they swarm and they attack the intruder. So we wanted to know, do elephants recognize the smell, and can you use it to actually deter elephants? So the paste comes in a product called Splat, and this Splat contains these special pheromones just synthetically produced. And what we did was we went to certain water holes around the beehive site in the Kruger, And we set up white socks, and they're white socks because we want to encourage an interaction. We want the elephants to see it and to be inquisitive as to what's going on. And certain socks had this strong pheromone inside of them, and other socks were control socks, so it's just stones, nothing else. And what we found was an 86% success rate of deterring elephants when they walked past a pheromone sock, and they would either just leave or they would go around to the other side of the waterhole and drink there. Our control socks, on the other hand, usually ended up being tossed away or put in the mouth of an elephant and thrown somewhere else. So it was really interesting to see the difference there. And it then begs the question, can you use bee biology, not just bees themselves, to deter elephants? However, as the study moved away from our beehive site and the distance increases, we got less and less of a success rate. So it then begs the question, is it working because the elephants have come across bees in our study site? And so they start to recognize that smell. And therefore, how do you set up an experiment where you're going to have live bees, but also bee biology, whether it be sounds or the smells? So you can really start playing on where you do or don't want elephants to be. Then we've been doing some work with Joel Elvert from Wildscapes Veterinary and Conservation Services. And this has been a very special project which kicked off in December last year, where Joel is actually using the honey from our hives to treat animals. So honey is an amazing antiseptic, and it's natural, and it's coming from the bees within the own landscape that these animals are moving through. So with snaring incidents, not just on elephants, but on a whole variety of species, Joel has been applying this honey with some very encouraging results as to how it's working with healing the animals' wounds. So we're very excited to see that not only has the bee project gone from purely protecting trees, we've also shown that there's an income for those who use it. And of course, Lucy King has shown that in Kenya that it can be a sustainable way of actually making money but protecting your crops. But now we're showing that the honey itself can be used to treat the own animals that are moving within the reserve. So it's been very special for us to see this in action. And so to sum it up, the bee project at Elephants Alive is growing and growing by the year. We've moved from just bees and trees to increasing the biology effect with pheromones. We're looking at the people aspect now, where we're going to start working with anti-poaching rangers, training them in beekeeping, and seeing how that can be used as an income source, especially during these COVID times where a lot of people have lost their income in the Kruger Park region. And so it's very exciting for us to see how we can keep using this relationship to increase human-elephant coexistence within the Kruger region, but also elsewhere, including Mozambique, where we're very excited to start working. And so there's been a variety of groups involved with this that we're very thankful for. And it's just exciting for us. End of this month is the 5-year assessment for this project. And so we'll see what those results look like. But we're very excited as to how this project continues to grow at Elephants Alive. And there's just some of our social media and email links if you want to get in contact with us regarding this project going forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Robin. That was very, very, very nice.
Thank you.
I think you have an awesome project. That's great. I wasn't expecting this interaction between bees and elephants. I was quite surprised.
It's been an amazing thing to watch, just how the elephants, when you see them and how big they are, and then you realize just how impressively aggressive these honeybees are, to chase them off all the time. It's been really special to learn more about bees, being an elephant researcher.
Yeah, I can. No, it's amazing, and it's a clever way to reduce wildlife and human conflict as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's and the way you can use the honey. Sorry. No, I think it's great.
Thank you.
So congratulations, and thank you very much for coming. So yeah, if you want to post any questions now, you can use the chat. And I see that. Okay, let me go on. So Sandra is asking, where can you buy the honey?
So at the moment, our honey comes and goes very quickly because we're dealing with a small number of hives. We sell it locally in the Hoedspruit region, but we also do distribute it across South Africa. We haven't got the permission yet to export it, but certainly across the country we are selling it. And then once our project kicks off with the anti-poaching groups, that's the Black Mamba anti-poaching group here in the Kruger Park system, there's going to be a lot more honey coming in, and then a lot more honey available for selling.
Great, thank you. And Karin's asking if this method can be used in gardens that border protected areas.
Yes, without a doubt. So the whole point of the beehive fence is you want to encourage the elephant to bump the hive. So what we've seen some people try to do is put a beehive on a cement block, for example, and then they complain that the elephant might still come through. And the thing is, if the beehive isn't being disturbed, the bees don't really have a reason to come out and attack, and so the elephants will walk through, especially at nighttime when the bees are less active. So the point of the fence is to have that connection wire between the hives around your garden or your crop field. And so as an elephant comes to crop raid, it touches that wire, and it just means those hives slowly start to sway. And that annoys the bees to the point that they'll come out and start to attack.
Yeah, I see. Really nice. And David is asking, what are the main reasons why elephants want to damage the trees?
The main reason would be food. So we look at it less as damage and more, it's a form of impact, but it's a natural impact. They're feeding off the branches. Marulas, for example, they love the fruit, and it's very good food source for them in terms of nutrition. So being a big herbivore, they generally just have a larger impact on the tree itself. What we sometimes see with the bulls is when they're in must, for example, they might be more inclined to push down a tree, almost to just either release that frustration, because they've just got so much testosterone built up in them that if there's a tree in the way, they might just push it over because they can, or it's a way of sort of showing off to your other bull competitors, look what I can do, and the tree goes down. It's the same reason they'll push down a pole, for example. It's not for the food, it's just because they can. But really, they are just mega herbivores. They are a bit more destructive in their feeding habits. And so we're not trying to stop that at all. We're just trying to find methods to protect certain tree species, particularly those larger ones which can act as seed banks in the future, and to give landowners or reserves a way to protect them.
That's great. Thank you very much. Oh, and there's another question following with this one. If they do feed on the roots, when they uproot them, they do.
Yes, they do. And we see that as the dry season progresses, and there's not grass for them to go for, even if the leaves aren't there, then we start seeing trees pushed over and they're going for the roots itself. That's correct.
Okay. So there's a question about if the annual increase in tree damage, it's a worrying sign, like because there's excessive density of elephants, maybe?
Okay, to answer that question, it's a bit more complex. So in these smaller reserves, or these reserves with a lot of water, we look at directly protecting individual trees because you can't manipulate elephants. In terms of the Kruger Park system itself, they've been closing down a lot of water holes over the last few decades. And the reason they do that is you get heavy elephant impact around a waterhole. It's called a biosphere effect. But then as you move away from the waterhole, elephant impact decreases because there's just less elephants there. And so it creates heterogeneity. So you get heavy impact and then areas of less impact. So it's a patchy effect. And you get species that thrive in areas with elephant impact and others that thrive in areas where there's not. And so we might see from the human aspect that it looks really bad at times, but if we zoom out and look at it on a larger scale, we see this heterogeneic effect going across the Kruger system, the Botswana system, for example. And so ideally, you'd prefer to manipulate elephants' movements. But like I say, the bee project comes in when you're in an area just too small to do that, and you then can protect your trees using other methods.
Great, thank you. And I think this is going to be our last question before we move on. And they're asking if this method is also used to protect the pepper bark trees in Kruger National Park.
It's not being used, this method itself is not being used for the pepperbark trees, but I do know that they're doing a lot of work in the nurseries, regrowing these trees and actually selling them to the traditional healers on the outside. So that project's really looking at preventing poaching of these trees and actually providing traditional healers with an alternative source to collect their pepperbarks for their treatments.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And I will share, you shared your Facebook and Instagram, so I will share, and the contact, so I will try to share it in the email I sent with the link of the video. So if anyone has any other questions or wants to know about more about the project, they can access. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.